Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This video will be a quick initial impression review of the new release Top Gun Maverick. I wasn't really intending on seeing it early, but I had the chance to go to one of the special preview or premiere screenings this Tuesday, and I wanted to see the film in at least one of its premium format offerings. So when I had the chance to, and I was able to go to our only local Dolby Cinema, which is quite a little bit of a drive, I decided, why not? Especially since this film, I really wanted to, see it in a premium offering and also be able to enjoy the sound mix, because I will admit my favorite part of the original film is its beautiful sound design for 1986, particularly in the original 70mm mix, which only has a few select home video releases, primarily the old classic standby AC3 Laserdisc. I've never been a giant fan of the original film. I do think some of the criticisms of it are valid, but you can't deny its cultural impact nor its sort of sensory overload, which I think is primarily due to it being the first major Tony Scott extravaganza that sort of became his signature style. Because, of course, it's easy to forget that before that, his only major film had been 1983's The Hunger, so it was a bit of a risky choice bringing him in to do Top Gun in 1986. The film was criticized for being very pro-war, almost jingoistic to a way, and also being part of the sort of British invasion of commercial directors and really pushing what was termed the MTV video cutting style, and that was also aided by the fact of its legendary hit soundtrack that sold millions and millions of copies. But even though the script is very threadbare in places, it has an impact, and it has a particular identity that I think was why it earned such a legion of fans and why it had such a long theatrical release window and then became successful all over again on home video, particularly since it was one of the first films to be offered at a lower reduced price point in the VHS era. So that meant, of course, everybody could buy it and rewatch it a million times because they only owned one or two films, so it just further penetrated the cultural lexicon. When you go back to it, you still get that sense of experience, and that it's that sense of it being more of a sensory experience that makes it stand up, because if it didn't have that, the story is extremely threadbare and seems to be comprised of quite a number of what would be termed cliches of the aviation or aviator genre, if you will. Whether if you're talking about World War II films about the Air Force, like Dive Bomber, or even films of the 50s, like Strategic Air Command, but especially the greats of the aviation genre, from Only Angels Have Wings to both versions of the Dawn Patrol, for example, and many, many other films. All you have to do is look at any of them, and you'll recognize some of these same themes, but most of those are either, if they were made in World War II, they were like war propaganda films for rousing the home front and trying to get them behind the war effort, or they were very clearly anti-war films like the Dawn Patrol. So without those additional layers and themes, Top Gun has always been more of a empty experience for me, so I've never latched on to it like everyone else, but I can appreciate it for its cultural impact, for some of the iconic moments, and on a technical level, because it's brilliantly put together. So all this means that with the long gap between films, suddenly having a sequel all these years later, there's quite a built-in fan base and quite a lot to live up to. And I knew it would be pretty solid when it was announced that it would be Joseph Kosinski directing it, because I was very surprised when he and Tom Cruise made Oblivion a number of years ago that there was some dramatic meat on the bones. There was some strength to it, and it did have very heavy vibes of a lot of classic 70s dystopic science fiction films. I don't think it's a perfect film. I think it has a number of issues, but for me to like anything in most modern films is it's a pretty rare occurrence. So I was very pleasantly surprised, and it also had a really nice sound mix to it as well. So I basically I felt like the project as it was in pretty good hands and could turn out well, and also with a lot of the pre-release press and a lot of the release being about seeing this film properly in a theater and not refusing to have it debut on a streaming platform, which meant Paramount held the film from release for essentially the entirety of the pandemic. So this is technically a film that's, I guess, 3 years old and in that sense. But that also means they could further tweak things and have more time to maybe sand off some of the rough edges. It is a longer film than the original, which honestly, you can start to feel it towards the third act. That's also got some of the modern cinematic disease, if you will, of having sort of multiple ending points where there's points where you think the film is over and then we have another set piece. It does have moments where it definitely feels like it's transitioning more into a Mission Impossible film series type scenario, like one of the modern Mission films. But it doesn't stray too far into that world, but you can get that sense, and it is kind of obvious. I actually heard people in the theater I was in commenting on that during the movie. It's also one of those films that obviously you're going to have to reference the original. There is one moment where they use some footage as a quick flashback of the original, and that's the only instance, which I did appreciate. I hate it when films over rely on constantly flashing back to original beloved titles, but it also does the, I guess you would call it the modern trope of, it doesn't necessarily repeat the original, but it frequently echoes it. So you have moments that echo the original. There is, of course, a scene where the team members have a friendly game. So they're not playing volleyball, but they're on a beach, and it's obviously, designed to bring back memories of the original. So again, it's this concept of it is echoing, but it also echoes the original a little bit in its structure. So it's not just that it's, oh, this is an echo of the scene in the original, but this is also an echo of what point in time of the runtime and the story structure this came in the original, even though it is a longer film. The opening is done to exactly mimic the original. You also have usage of the original Top Gun theme in places. The Danger Zone is used once in the opening again to exactly mimic the original. They even try to mimic the opening title font, and that's, I guess, to sort of reassure everyone that they're in the same sort of landscape. But then suddenly that ends and we're into a completely different film that is very modern. I will admit it was nice to see. It seemed like they tried to mimic some of the longer takes and longer edits, because when you look at the original, there are actually a number of moments where some shots and close-ups are held, which seems to go hand in hand with the again, that sort of Tony Scott extremely sensory type experience. But I wish there had been more of that, because it seems very fleeting, and it seems once that opening is over, and I'd say about 20 or 30 minutes in, all that stuff sort of disappears, and it does look and feel very much like what you would expect from the guy behind Oblivion doing a quote-unquote Top Gun film today. There's not a whole lot of feeling of what you associate with the original film, which is good in one way to be modern and be very in the moment of 2022, but also outside of a few occasional mentions of some of the side characters, and then Val Kilmer's Iceman appearing in one scene, which is the highlight of the entire film. You wouldn't really think of this as being a Top Gun film if you missed the opening, and if they didn't call Tom Cruise's character Maverick. You could, for most of the runtime, consider this, or you would think you were in just a modern Tom Cruise film. So they at least pepper in some of the iconography, but they're not answering any of the questions about what happened in the interim. You just get the the barest and briefest mentions, and because you get that, you kind of want to know a little bit more, but it's not really fleshed out, and it's just there. A lot of the side characters are not really developed at all, which is the same thing you get in the original film, and there's a love subplot that's well performed, but it just doesn't really go anywhere, which is kind of like the original in a way too. There is no awkward sex scene this time. I will say that it is it's a solid experience. It's something that you will definitely feel like you get your money's worth, and of course you go in for the visuals and the sound design, and they are able to technically advance over what they were able to do in 1986 in terms of getting the cameras in the cockpit and getting them closer to the actors and enhancing that sense of realism. The end cockpit shots, you get all these panoramic views of seeing the entire canopy with the actors in there. So that immersion factor is there in the air. And they also did a relatively good job at keeping the spatial orientation locked, because it is one of the hardest things in the world to do, to have any sort of aerial movement and be able to have the audience maintain what's going on. It was a very difficult thing to do with the original film. It's very difficult to do in any aviation film, but when you're dealing with jets with a lot, with motion that is extremely hard to photograph, let alone edit and understand, you can't keep the geography straight in your head. So that's a problem they had to deal with in the original. It's a problem they still have to deal with in this film today. They do a pretty good job, but they're also using a lot of computer overlays, and there's always these mission briefings, because this film is not about the Top Gun class as it was in the original. It's about preparing a team, and then again you have some of those Mission Impossible overtones once again, which in that sort of scenario it's kind of inescapable, but there are multiple points where there is that sort of, okay, this is Mission Impossible with wings. So it is it's a solid film, which is what I expected going in, knowing what the pairing of Tom Cruise and Joseph Kosinski had done before. And Cruise has a very wonderful talent for recognizing when he works well with people and then reteaming with them, which is sort of a lost art in the modern cinematic landscape, which is why you see him reteaming with people over and over and over again, from Christopher McQuarrie to Joseph Kosinski to Doug Liman after Edge of Tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And it makes you think of the old studio system days when certain actors and directors or writers and actors or what have you would be paired several different times by the studio when they had a successful hit, so you could see them work together again in a couple other films, whether it be the legendary pairings like Errol Flynn with both Raoul Walsh and Michael Curtiz, or lesser thought of or lesser known ones where it was just stars and directors paired for 2 or 3 different vehicles over a certain span of years. The score is a mixture of throwback to the original, with Harold Faltermeyer's theme being brought in, but also brand new stuff, because the score was done by Hans Zimmer. It's not particularly memorable, and the most memorable parts are where they are reusing a material from the original film that doesn't have the chart-topping soundtrack and songs from the original in terms of having its own new soundtrack. It does rather distractingly have some, what I term the classic rock needle drops that a lot of films have nowadays, which seems very jarring. Another jarring element is when the film does attempt humor. It's sort of, it's played fine and it works and the audience laughs, but it sort of stops the film cold. It is somewhat like what you get in the Mission Impossible films, the more modern ones, where they sort of stop the film and have the humorous little back and forth dialogue. It's not quite as, it's much better done than what you get in the Marvel films, where it's a major problem, but it does have some of the same issues, and it does feel very much out of place from what you were expecting in going into this. Again, the best scene in the film is Val Kilmer's appearance, and they handle his health problems extremely well, and it is the most genuine performed scene in the entire picture. I think it's actually, if you're a fan of the original or you're a Val Kilmer fan, I think it is worth seeing the entire film for that scene, actually. In terms of the overall impact, though, it is somewhat like the original, at least for me, that you don't really get left with very much. It's fine, it's okay, it's solid, but when it's over, you stop and think, okay, what exactly did I take away from this? And the answer is not really much. It's in some ways it's sort of like an end note to the original film. It does sort of close off some story elements that were started there. It does feel relatively like a natural growth from the original film. It will appease fans of Top Gun, I think, who wanted another film or wanted a sequel. It will please most audiences, but outside of that, you're not particularly invested in a lot that's going on. The aerial sequences are jaw-dropping in places, and the audacity of doing this stuff and doing everything for real that you possibly could and pushing yourself to the limit, which is what they sell Tom Cruise pictures on, and he very smartly realized that was his modern selling plug for films and making them much more into trying to be event films, which don't really exist anymore in the traditional sense. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot there. So it's a solid experience. But what I missed, and what I think is missing, is that it's that Tony Scott spark. It's that hypersensitivity. Whether you love his bold color palette, this film was not shot on film like the original was, and there's something to seeing the bold colors and the 80s green structure in the stocks that were being used, and the limitations of the time, but it was Tony Scott's sort of risky in places, but heavily stylization that pushes this sort of sensory overload, and you don't have that here. It does not, forgive the horrible pun, take your breath away. So sorry, I couldn't resist. That's what I think was really missing. And of course, with the sad passing of Tony Scott, when they were starting to even discuss doing this a number of years ago, I don't know if he would have. He probably wouldn't have directed this, but he obviously was already having some input and might have directed it. I do think his style, which was so key to the original film, is very distinctly missing, and it's that spark that I was hoping would come in somewhere. You don't really get that. Again, it does sort of feel like a modern Tom Cruise film in a lot of ways, which is fine. It's solid, but I just kind of wished it had some spark to it. So again, I think it will please most people. The reviews so far have been rather good, and it is worth going to a theater and seeing, because you will want to see it on the best screen possible. And on a technical side, the imagery and the flight sequences is, again, it's amazing they were able to achieve this, and with that sense of realism. The sound design is quite nice. Again, I saw it in Dolby Cinema, so I was able to hear it in Dolby Atmos. I really want to hear it in where I can more closely look at the sound design, in terms of I really want to see what it looks and sounds like on the eventual physical media release. Of course, it will probably be a home Atmos remix, but it still should give you the design principle of the sound mix. I will say I'm not a fan of the Dolby Cinema seat transducers that basically give you that sort of buzz in your seat, a lot like the butt kicker unit you can get for home theaters. I don't really like that. It's very sort of gimmicky, at least in my opinion, which sort of took away a little bit from the experience for me. But it is bold in the right places, like you would expect from a Top Gun sequel sound mix. But I do still prefer it didn't quite have the grandeur of the original 1986 film's 6-track 70mm mix. So ultimately, it's a solid film. I think it works. It works better than I thought it would, but it doesn't really ever grab you or make you feel like you're leaving the theater with anything. So see it for yourself, see what you think. And again, I do think if you can see it in a premium format, it's going to be worth the little bit of extra money for the ticket price, whether you're seeing it in one of those digital IMAX screenings or you're seeing it in a Dolby Cinema. I think if you saw it in a 4DX theater, which I think is a gimmick and a joke, you'd probably be sick. And then it's also apparently in that god-awful Screen X thing where they do the sort of worst joke impersonation of a 3-panel Cinerama feature where you have the 2 screens on the side and it's all janky, and I absolutely abhor that even more than I do 4DX theaters. But I think there's also a 3D conversion too, which is really kind of unnecessary. But I would recommend seeing it in the best theater possible. I think you will get that benefit, and you'll be able to better experience the sound design, which is very key to this film. So again, it's not a raving positive. It's not a negative review. I think it's really solid. I think it's better than what most people are expecting after all this time. You do get your money's worth, but you don't really come away with much. It's very much just like, okay, here's an end note on this. And I think that's about as best as you can do in this type of scenario now in 2022 with a sequel made all these years later. It doesn't leave a bad taste in the mouth for fans of the original, like other films of similar origins. It's sequels made to films decades later in the modern era. It's solid. So I do recommend seeing it on the best screen possible, and just wanted to share my initial thoughts and opinions on it. So again, fans of the original Top Gun, I think you'll find things to enjoy in it. Fans of the technical side of movie making, you'll find stuff to enjoy in it. And people who just want great theater experiences with some sense of bigger than life will get something out of it in the premium screening. So with that, I hope this has been somewhat informative and enjoyable, and I would love to hear your comments about the film. It just, whether you love it or hate it, so if you're a fan of the original or not, I'd love to hear your thoughts below in the comments section. And as always, thanks ever so much for watching.